Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Atlantic Council. My name is Michael Anderson. I'm an executive at Saab as well as a board director here at the Atlantic Council. On behalf of Saab and the Atlantic Council Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security, its Forward Defense Program, and the Geotech Center, it is my honor and privilege to welcome you to today's Atlantic Council Front Page and Commander Series event, a conversation featuring the first Chief of Space Operations for the United States Space Force, General John Raymond. Additionally, we're very delighted that General Raymond will be receiving the Atlantic Council's Distinguished Military Leadership Award this evening at our annual Distinguished Leadership Awards ceremony. Please join me in congratulating General for this achievement. Today, the commercial space sector is growing at an unprecedented rate. We have seen drastic numbers of satellites launched into orbit, strengthening global communications and navigation systems, and collecting terrestrial and atmospheric data to help us better understand and protect the planet that we all call home. Scientific achievements continues to push the bounds of our imagination, constantly raising the bar for what humanity can accomplish in the vast cosmos. Space is inspirational, holding the potential to improve the human experience for generations to come. All the while, we're in the midst of intense international competition in space as on Earth. US adversaries are ramping up their development of space-related technologies, assets, and systems that challenges US and allied assure access to space and the stability of the global space ecosystem. Counter-space weapons such as anti-satellite capabilities, directed energy weapons, and tools of electronic warfare pose real threats to national security. In this context, the US Space Force has recently published a commercial space strategy, which lays out the ways in which commercial space actors can contribute to US national security objectives in space. The conversation today will tackle some of the main questions facing the United States and like-minded spacefaring nations today. How can we maintain space access for the common benefit of humanity while mitigating threats to space assets? Convenings such as these are integral to the Council's extensive work driving international and cross-sector discussion on outer space. The Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security works to develop sustainable, nonpartisan strategies to address the most important security challenges facing the United States and its allies and partners. The Center honors General Brent Scowcroft's legacy of service and embodies his ethos of nonpartisan commitment to the cause of security, support for U.S. leadership in cooperation with allies and partners, and dedication to the mentorship of the next generation of leaders. Within the Scowcroft Center, the Forward Defense Program conducts the Council's U.S. defense strategy, policy, and future warfare work. FD conducts analysis of the defense trends, strategies, capabilities, and resources to the United States needs to deter and, if necessary, prevail in future conflict. FD space security work addresses the growing threats posed by adversaries to both governments, commercial space assets, offering actionable policy solutions to preserve space superiority and strategic stability. By advancing a resilient and effective space system, this work strengthens the credibility of U.S. conventional and nuclear deterrence, enhances the efficiency of missile defense in an era of intensifying peer competition. The Geotech Center, on the other hand, is at the helm of shaping the civil and commercial space policy landscape, in addition to its other policy focus areas of AI, data, and climate technology. Through curating impactful dialogues around the world among the space ecosystem's most influential governments and prominent companies, the Geotech Center bridges the gap between scientists, policymakers to create actionable policy that further U.S. and partner nations' space missions and enhances global security and prosperity for the collective benefit of humanity. As we said earlier, this is a Commander Series event, so a little bit of the background to the Commander Series. When Saab and the Atlantic Council started this program in 2009, our vision was to establish a flagship speakers forum for senior military and defense leaders to discuss the most important security challenges both now and in the future. This series has been very useful for defense companies like Saab, helping us better understand challenges and priorities in order to inform our investments and partnerships, particularly when it comes to research and development, while better preparing ourselves to meet the future capability needs. Today's event is the first installment of the Commander Series this year, and we're looking forward to many good programs during 2025. Today, we are honored to welcome General Raymond to the program. Coming back to the program, you've been here before. General Raymond has served 38 years in the U.S. Air Force and U.S. Space Force, advancing national security, culminating in his service as the first Chief of Space Operations for the then newly established United States Space Force. He's a recognized leader, known for his role in shaping the establishment and architecture of the U.S. Space Force and for strengthening the relationship with U.S. allies and partners around the world. Some quick housekeeping before we get started. As a reminder, this event is public and on the record, as we encourage our audience, though, to ask questions by using askac.org or by raising your hand when directed by the moderator, and someone will bring a microphone over to you. Be sure to identify yourself and affiliation in your questions, but I would also like to welcome our online audience and encourage you to join the conversation on X by following at AC Scowcroft and at AC Geotech and using the hashtag #ForwardDefense. With that, it is my distinct pleasure to turn things over to General Raymond and our moderator, Teresa Hitchens, Senior Space Reporter at Breaking News, as they begin the conversation. Thank you very much, and over to you.
Well, welcome everyone. And first I need to say thank you to the Atlantic Council for inviting me here today. This is a great opportunity. I'm looking forward to the conversation. And I want to just stress that we are going to have 15 minutes for audience questions. So please get one ready as we talk. Raise your hand, wait for the microphone to come around and state your name and your affiliation. Those of you online, if you could do the same, that would be great. I'm not going to say much here because really you came to listen to General Raymond. So I'm going to kick it off. We're going to do a little Q&A up here, just a informal a bit chat. And then, as I said, we'll open it up for questions. So I'm going to start. General Raymond, you've been, as Michael said, in this business for practically 38 years, a long time. Before the reconstituted U.S. Space Command, before the Space Force existed, you were working at Air Force Space Command on these issues. So much has changed over the last 2 to 3 decades in the national space arena, in the commercial space arena, just across the board. And I wondered if you could talk to us just a little bit, set the scene about those changes and why they are important for where we are today and where we need to go in the future in national security space.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate that question, and thanks so much for the kind introduction. Thanks to the Atlantic Council. It's a real privilege to be here. I've been in the space business my whole career. I started out, pretty much held every job there was in the space business in the Air Force. There's been a long debate for over 30 years. I think the debate's been going on what's the right organizational structure for space. It really heated up when Congressman Rogers and Congressman Cooper from the House Armed Services Committee really began digging into this, and from late 2016 on till 2019, when the Space Force was actually established, there was a series of legislations, National Defense Authorization Acts, that occurred that began to set the stage for this new thing called a Space Force. People ask me all the time, if you were in the Air Force for 35 and a half years, and we've been in the space business since the 50s, why did we need a Space Force? And I think it gets to the heart of your question. The domain has changed significantly. We use the 3 Cs. It's much more congested, it's much more competitive, and it's much more contested. So we have a domain that is extremely critical to every one of our way of lives, and it's extremely critical to our way of war. And the nation decided in 2019 to elevate space to a level that's commensurate with the importance that it is for our nation and our allies and partners, and hence we set up a Space Force. At the same time, commercial industry is blossoming, so we really felt there was a way to have a more fused relationship with commercial industry to help us move at speed, help us with technology insertion and innovation, help with professional development and recruiting of of space professionals into the Space Force. So for a whole international partners, which I hope we can dig into as well, we needed stronger international partnerships in space. For all of those reasons, the United States decided to establish the Space Force. And I will tell you now, I'm biased. I get that, but I'm glad we did. I think there's not a single person that would argue that we were better off 5 years ago than we are today. And it became clear that Congress and then President Trump in the first administration in signing the law really did the right thing for our nation and for global security.
Great. Let's talk a little bit about the role of the Space Force, particularly in the question of deterrence writ large, not just deterrence in space. And one of the issues that's been around for a long time, policy issues, is the sort of the nexus between what happens in space and nuclear deterrence. And that's an issue that, is difficult. There's a lot of nuances, and God knows there's shelves of books written about nuclear deterrence, perhaps not so many about space deterrence, but space is now considered an integral part of the deterrence structure and increasingly the U.S. way of war. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that and the importance of that, the importance of space to that construct.
Yeah, I've thought a lot about this. And when we stood up the Space Force, one of my senior mentors for many, many, many years said that's one of the areas that you should really sink your teeth into as you stand up this service. What does space mean for deterrence? I hope there's not a book written on space deterrence, because I don't think there is such a thing. I think it's deterrence. And if you look at the last National Defense Strategy, there was something that kind of the foundation of that National Defense Strategy was integrated deterrence. It's taking all strategic capabilities and figuring out how you leverage all of those plus all of the capabilities of our international partners to be able to change that deterrence calculus. The deterrence calculus traditionally is imposing costs and denying benefits. I really believe that space can amplify those deterrence messages. And if we do, and if we can deter conflict from beginning or extending into the space domain, then I think we've got a real shot at deterring conflict from spilling over into other domains. So I typically, when I think about it, I don't think about space deterrence. I think about overall deterrence and what is space's play into that deterrence. And I think, again, amplifying deterrence messages in order to keep conflict from beginning or extending into space early is going to be important for the broader deterrence calculus.
Can I just sort of dig into that just briefly as a follow-up? Recently there's been a lot of focus in the Space Force on the idea of normalizing warfighting in space and discussions of orbital warfare in a way that we could never have 30 years ago. I've been doing this a long time too. There was a time when nobody could say the word space weapons in the same sentence, right? So this is a different thrust, if you will, toward this kind of warfighting mindset. How does that fit into deterrence, and are there any concerns that it might actually undercut deterrence by maybe encouraging adversaries to be more aggressive in their own policies?
Yeah, so I agree with you that back in pre-2014 we really couldn't say space and warfighting together in public. We since then have matured past that. And I think it's important that we have those conversations. I think it's important for the average American or the average citizen of the globe to understand that space is a contested warfighting domain. That's why we set up a Space Force. We have an Army that for the ground domain, you have a Navy for the maritime domain, you have an Air Force for the air domain, and now you have a Space Force for the space domain. I do believe, as I think through that, I have those discussions as it relates to deterrence. And so you'll again, the two things, imposing costs and denying benefits. For the last handful of years, we've really focused on the denying benefits. And you've seen us shift, or in the process of shifting, to a more resilient architecture, a proliferated architecture in multiple orbits. And in doing so, I think you complicate the targeting for anybody that might want to do us harm and help deny the benefits of those attacks. I think there's the other side of that coin then. If you're going to really deter, you also have to be able to impose costs. And the reason why it's so important, it's about protecting our land forces, our air forces, and our maritime forces. China has built a pretty significant space-enabled military. So people talk about Desert Storm being the first space war. I disagree with that. I think the Cold War was the first space war. But I do believe that Desert Storm back in 1991 was the first war where we took strategic space capabilities and integrated those capabilities into theater operations at a level that we hadn't done in the past. It has become much, much more, we've relied very heavily on it, and almost my entire career has been spent integrating those space capabilities into theater operation. And we've had the monopoly on that since 1991, and we've gotten really good at it, and it's provided us great advantage. Well, others have had a front row seat and have watched that advantage, and now they're doing the same thing. And so if you look at what China has built, they now have a very capable space-enabled military that can threaten our traditional joint warfighting partners. And we have to have the ability to protect those forces, just as we have the capabilities to protect our space capabilities.
Gotcha. Speaking of hybrid architecture and proliferated architecture, that brings in the commercial aspect, and I know a lot of our audience are interested in those issues. That's been another big thrust over the last couple of years, is commercial partnerships and bringing the commercial sector, I guess, closer to the national security sector, particularly in the innovation space, startups and private equity, venture cap funded capabilities and new companies, et cetera. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what the U.S. military, or what the Space Force in particular, sees as the importance of commercial, and I'm just going to, and maybe address the fact that for a long time we've been saying those words, but we kind of weren't really, nothing really came of them, if you will. Not as much perhaps as I think people were expecting in the commercial sector. So there was a little bit of a letdown, and now I think there's more enthusiasm. Maybe you could talk about that.
Yeah. So historically, what has been commercially first of all, I agree with the questioning. We've worked really hard to partner with commercial space. As a young officer in the Air Force, as a young captain, I worked at Air Force Space Command, and my duty title was the commercial space officer at Air Force Space Command. Back then, really the only things that were really commercially viable were commercial launch and large commercial SATCOM. Those were the two things that were commercially viable. And if you recall, back in the early 90s when I was doing this, there was the first wave of proliferation that was being thought through. You have Iridium satellites, you had a satellite company I think called Teledesic, and there was something called Global Star, and there was this planned proliferation in space of these satellites. So we were giving commercial payload processing centers to commercial industry to be able to process those satellites. We gave commercial launch pads to launch those. Companies were building small rockets to launch a replenishment of those to be launched proliferated constellations. Really, that didn't materialize. Iridium materialized with strong support from the government, but the other ones didn't. We're back to that now. And so what historically has been commercial satellites and launch, now with launch costs largely driven by commercial launch going down, and the barriers to entry into space being reduced, and with technology allowing smaller satellites to be more relevant, we're now in a place where more missions can now be commercially viable. So in addition to launch and large SATCOM. So you see commercial ISR, commercial space situational awareness. You mentioned in the comment about earlier about GSAP,
Yep.
Space situational awareness. You've got potential satellite servicing that the department is thinking through. So there's more opportunities for commercially viable things that the Space Force can then leverage. When I was in my job as a member of the Joint Chiefs, every week we'd sit to get down in a conference room with the Joint Chiefs, and I always looked around the table and I thought, man, I'm lucky, because I have this commercial industry that's really blossoming. I used to use the word an explosion. It's a really bad word to use when you're talking space stuff. But I thought if there's a way that we could harness this and leverage this, we'd get a lot of advantage with speed of innovation, reduced costs, increased mission capability. And I looked around the tables, others didn't have that. What you're beginning to see now, though, others are beginning to have that in the air domain with the CCA program in the maritime domain with proliferation of capability. So I believed I was lucky, and I really wanted to make sure that we could leverage that in a good way. What I have learned since I've retired is that I didn't know a whole lot about commercial industry. I had a lot to learn. I work for a private equity company called Cerberus, and I remember, kind of on my first call, taking pages and pages of notes of acronyms. And I know all my acronyms, but I didn't know any of these other acronyms. And I'm like, what are we talking about? And what I have learned is, I wish I would have known more back then, because then maybe I could have helped industry better help me. And so we operate two different systems, profit and loss, not profit and loss. We operate on different time cycles. There's lots of challenges, but if we can work through this, and it's the Space Force being a way to lead that developing a more fused relationship, I think there's advantage there to be had.
It seems like there's been a lot more effort put into it at DoD writ large, but at the Space Force and Space Command in particular. What do you think more should be done, or how maybe should it be done differently? Are there more things to be able to learn to speak each other's languages that could be done at this point in time?
First of all, I applaud the commercial space strategy that has come out. I think there's good words in there. I like what I'm hearing about leveraging what we have in different ways, buying what we can, and only building what you have to build. I like that. Now it's going to be taking that from paper and making it reality. That's the difficult part. One of the things that I'm working on with the Stanford Business School is a briefing that I can then give to general officers in professional development classes to teach about business and what makes them tick and what is important for them to know to help better leverage that. I think if you look at the strategy and you look at those three tenets that I just talked about, and if you look at recent examples where the Space Force has said, I just read about GSAP, yeah. I think we're headed in the right direction. So I'm pretty excited about what I'm hearing.
Great.
I think it also brings in, I would say the same thing holds true with our international partners. Yeah. And there's great opportunities to partner with our international partners as well.
How big of a problem do you think classification issues still are, both for cooperation with the commercial sector and in particular the international partners? That's long been a stumbling block to even just being able to integrate on the battlefield in a contingency, where there have been problems sharing information under fire. And so, to have an integrated, I guess, industrial base, if you will, you really need to be able to work on these things from development sort of forward, and classification has been a barrier to that. Can you talk about that?
I'll tell you a funny story. I was the commander of Air Force Space Command, and a friend of mine who had retired said, "You don't know how much money and time industry spends trying to figure out what's in your head." And I said, "Well, I don't want them to spend a dime on that or a second of time. I will tell them." And so we wrote out a strategy. And I invited everybody to come, industry to come have this discussion. It was classified at the OMG level. And turns out like 2 or 3 people could show up and that was it. And you really couldn't have a robust discussion. We have been significantly overclassified in the space business. I think it stems from our heritage in the Cold War. I think we have made some progress. Clearly, we have made some progress over the years. I think it's critical that we do so for lots of reasons, including deterrence, which we talked about earlier. So I would not declare victory. I think there's still a lot of work to do, but I know the department's focused on it. I know there's changes that were made when I was still serving, and I know that continues.
Okay. I guess this is there's this program that the Space Force has been working on, the CASR program, sort of replicating the Civil Aircraft Reserve concept for space. And one of the issues that's come up is the question of what role the military will have in protecting commercial space assets, particularly as those two universes, or I don't want to call them domains, but come closer together when the military is relying for things like, space situational awareness, critical mission functions on commercial providers. It seems to me that it complicates perhaps the Space Force's mission, and it may complicate thoughts about deterrence and how adversaries think about what they want to do.
I missed what complicates it? I missed
The linkage between the increased reliance of the Space Force on the commercial sector. So does it complicate the Space Force's protect mission, and does it create problems for figuring out what adversaries might target, right?
Yeah, first of all, space is hard. If it was easy, anybody could do it. We're still the best in the world in space, especially with our allies and partners at our side. I do think it's a really complex situation that has to be thought through. If you look at the analogy that I use is with the Navy. The Navy provides security over the oceans to protect sea lines of communications. I think the Space Force has a role of ensuring a secure environment. Economies, business can thrive in space, exploration can thrive in space, and that everybody can use the space domain for its purposes. And so I do think there's a role there. If you look at when we stood up U.S. Space Command in August of 2019, there's a document called the UCP, the Unified Command Plan, and that's the document that tells the combatant commander, the President of the United States tells the combatant commander what his or her mission is. If you look at the UCP that was written when U.S. Space Command stood up, there's a line in there, and I don't have it memorized anymore, but it says that the Space Command shall help protect and defend U.S. and allies and others as directed. So there is, I do believe, analogous to the maritime domain, there is a need for a safe and secure domain, and I think the Space Force has a role in that.
If you were going to give advice to prospective commercial partners for the Space Force at this juncture, what would be the top 3 things you would tell them?
Engage. It would be number one. Have a conversation. The Space Force is eager to have those conversations. We can't do this alone. I would hear a lot of times with commercial industry, I would hear, don't come tell me what your requirements are. Don't drop a book this big of requirements. Tell me what you're trying to solve, and then let's have a conversation. And I'll tell you how I would go about doing that. And so I think engaging in those conversations early and helping shape that is important. So I would encourage robust integration, especially as the Space Force is shifting more towards leveraging commercial. Your voice really matters in that, and you can really, really help shape that. The second thing is I would say deliver on time and be cheap. If you can come in at a lower cost and you can deliver on time at a tactical timeline, you'll do really well. If you're really expensive and you're going to be really slow, probably don't compete very well. So engage in the conversation. Don't be so exquisite that we can't afford you, and deliver what you say you're going to do on the time scale that we need you.
This administration is kicking off a number of reviews of acquisition. There's a review of the federal acquisition regulations underway. There's been a lot of discussion about more use of other transactional authorities, middle-tier transactional authorities. How important do you think acquisition reform is to being able to bring more of the commercial sector in? I know in the past that people have felt that the acquisition rules have kind of stymied being able to rapidly innovate and bring new companies who weren't traditional defense companies, who have banks of lawyers who know how to read the FAR. Speaking of documents that are this big, and deal with it. It was difficult for small firms to be able to deal with that. So, is this an issue that you feel is pressing at this point? And
I think people used to ask me a lot what kept me awake at night, and it really wasn't any one thing. It was except our ability to go fast. I thought we had lost our ability to move at speed. And so it's really easy. Do we have any acquirers in the room, acquisition folks? I'm not one of those, and I'm kind of glad I'm not, because I don't have that skill set. But they tend to take a lot of blame.
Yeah.
If you're going to, and what I learned in my job is there's probably some blame there, and the rules that they have to follow are really, really burdensome. But I think they get a bum rap. I think it actually starts well before acquisition. I think it starts with force design. And if you design a force structure that is made up of a small number of very, very highly exquisite satellites that cost a lot of money, that are very technically complex, that take years and years and years to build, you really can't take any risk. And you're not going to do that fast. You're not going to go build, I'm making this up, a multi-billion-dollar satellite to do whatever it really, really quickly. And you're probably not leveraging the small, new, innovative commercial space industry that's blossoming, and probably not being able to partner as well with our international partners. So when we stood up, I actually started try to tackle it from the force design work. And if you come up with a different force design, like we did for missile warning and missile tracking, of large number of proliferated satellites, lower cost satellites in multiple orbits, rather than handfuls of exquisite satellites, you then can change the business model and change the risk calculus. Because you know, if a satellite's coming off an assembly line and it doesn't work, and it doesn't break the national treasury, it's no big deal, because another one's coming off in an hour or 5 minutes or a week or even a year, much less what the timelines that we're on today. And so I think the partnership with commercial really helps us change that business model, really helps us change the risk calculus. And I think there's great hope there.
Great. We're going to transition now to audience questions. Does anybody in the audience have a question?
Yes,
Please
sir.
state your name, wait for the microphone, would you? Thank you.
Sorry? Sure.
You're going to make it so hard people aren't going to want to ask questions.
Yeah, exactly. I'm Rehan Survey from South Africa, private side investments in Africa. Firstly, thank you so much, General James, and also Atlantic Council. My question stems from the shifting role in the space industry. I think the US government played a foundational and critical role in setting up the space industry. But over the last few years, we've seen a shift to the private industry playing a much bigger role in that side. So, and especially in terms of a global capacity as well, if we think of, the European conflict and SpaceX and Starlink. So from viewing that shift, how do you see, number one, the role of the US government in this? And secondly, do you see a threat to foreign policy as a result of the shift?
A threat to foreign policy?
Yes.
I don't see a threat to foreign policy. I see great hope. I think there's great opportunities. I think space is a domain that helps unite countries globally. I think one of the biggest benefits that we've had with establishing the Space Force are the global partnerships that we've either enhanced or developed. I think it adds to strategic stability. Even in the height of the Cold War, when we didn't have great relations with the then Soviet Union, we got along in space and we did space capabilities together. So I don't see it as a threat. I see it as an opportunity. On the shift to commercial, I'm excited about that as well. I mean, if you look at the innovation that's going on in the domain, I think there's great opportunities. I would bet on U.S. commercial industry any day. I think they deliver great capability. I think there is a role for government to partner with them in a way that makes them successful, so they can be more successful for the government as well. Most capabilities are dual use, so there's a government aspect of it and a commercial aspect of it. But I believe there's way more opportunities than challenges.
Great. We have a question online here from Jonathan Rosenstein of the Atlantic Council. As space is increasingly congested by new commercial actors from established and emerging spacefaring nations alike, how should the U.S. government and the Space Force be adapting its approach to space situational awareness and debris monitoring to ensure long-term viability of national space assets?
It's a really, really good question. It's a really important question. If I was here a few years ago, I would have told you I'm talking like I'm still in the service, that when I was in the service, I would have told you that we at the time were tracking about 22,000 objects, 23,000 objects. Today, that number is closer to 50,000 objects. If I was in my seat a few years ago and I was here in my job, I would have told you of that 23,000, about 1,500 were satellites. Everything else was debris. Today, don't quote me on this, it's roughly, I'm guessing, over 10,000 satellites. So the trends on both numbers of objects and active satellites have gone significantly higher. The need for domain awareness is critical. The Space Force acts as the space traffic control for the world. We monitor every piece of debris that we have the capability to monitor. We provide warning to the world if two things are going to collide, because we want to keep the domain safe for all to use. So we'll notify China that they're about to, as one of their satellites is about to hit a piece of debris that they created when they blew up their satellite back in 2007. We want to keep that domain safe. It's becoming more challenging based on the numbers, based on the size of the objects. The domain, as you know, things move very fast in the space domain. It's 17,500 miles an hour just to stay in space. So there's always challenges. We are always looking to refresh our capabilities. We have strong partnerships with domain sharing, space domain sharing arrangements that are also really important to us. The nation is really thinking through shifting the space traffic management portion of that to another civilian agency, vice the Space Force, which I think is the right way to go, and focus military efforts on military types of missions. But it's really important, and I'm proud of the work that we've done to keep the domain safe for all to use.
Great. We have a related question here, and it's about the new Orbital Watch program that recently the Space Force stood up to allow threat sharing information, unclassified information sharing, with over 900 commercial space companies. And the question is, how significant is this step in terms of integration of commercial space into the Space Force and military operations?
I think information sharing is always a good thing when you can. We stood up years ago. I played many years in a game called the Shriver War Game, and in that war game we had a commercial cell, and we played several years with this commercial cell. And it's interesting, when you play a war game, you're playing a fictional time period with fictional capabilities and fictional organizational structures, as an example. And I played myself in that war game. It's kind of fascinating when you play yourself. And then you come back home, and something happened in the space domain, and I'm like, where's my commercial cell? And I didn't have it. Like, man, this would have been really helpful to have. And so we partnered with commercial industry, and we stood up a commercial integration cell. Yep. Part of that commercial integration cell is information sharing to help with domain awareness, help with interference, all kinds of issues. And so the more information we can share, the better, because we all operate in the same domain.
Audience out here, come on, you guys. Surely you must have. This has been an interesting conversation. Somebody must have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Yep, way in the back.
Hey there, Elizabeth Ahrens from Impulse Space. Thanks so much for today. You noted the power of space as a soft power and the way that the United States treats that is really special. I was wondering if, from your experience, there are any ways that the civil side of space has really excited the international community in a way that you've seen a benefit from your seat, whether that's working with the civil side on satellites around Earth data, or if it's more human exploration, or just all of the above.
I think all of the above. I mean, I'm old enough. I was a little kid when I watched Man Walk on the Moon. My dad taught astronomy at West Point. I remember sitting on my living room floor watching that mission. And I remember turning around, and our dining room was right in back of me, and I went over and started building an Apollo rocket. It's a very inspiring thing. Space can really inspire our nation's youth. If you look at partnerships, international partnerships, most of our international partnerships are through the civil lane, historically through NASA. On the military side, in my personal opinion, we didn't have the partnerships that we really needed, that we need now. Historically, we didn't need them because the domain was a peaceful, benign domain without a threat. I was stationed in Japan in 2011, and there was a large earthquake and tsunami and nuclear reactor disaster. It was a terrible three disasters, string of disasters. And I remember I was in a job where I helped support Japan's recovery, helping lead U.S. recovery support to Japan. And I remember taking note. It wasn't a space job that I was in. I was in a job that was traditionally done by a pilot to broaden my experience. And I remember thinking to myself, and I saw how allies and partners came to the support of Japan. I thought, we don't have that in space. And so when I thought to myself, if I was ever going to be in a position where I could do something about that, I'm really going to prioritize international partnerships. And I think we've done pretty well at that. As I said, I think it's one of the great things that have come out of establishing the Space Force. We used to work very closely with NASA, both Senator Nelson and Representative Bridenstine. Representative Bridenstine came out with the Artemis Accords. We were trying to build norms of behavior, so I thought, hey, there's a partnership to be had here with our norms of behavior and for DoD space and national security space and work that's being done in NASA. So I believe NASA has long been the leader of those relationships that we then have been able to help mature for our purposes.
We have time for one more quick question down in front. Make it fast.
And make it easy.
This may not be easy. Michael Mailing,
Next question.
Michael Mailing, Starbridge Venture Capital. Early in Space Force's life, some of us on the outside heard about the brown versus blue water kind of discussion in terms of force projection beyond LEO. And with grand strategies being in the air right now and the White House coming out and suggesting that Mars is now within a national ambition, is it time to start revisiting the idea of force projection out into the blue water, getting Space Force out into cislunar space to be able to start setting those norms beyond what we're currently doing in LEO and GEO?
I think, first of all, the near-term priority was clearly closer to Earth. It was, the GEO and in. I think cislunar space is a critical strategic terrain that we're going to have to think through and utilize. I think as the world moves away from the Earth and explores Moon and potentially Mars in the future, or more humans go into space commercially, I do believe there is going to be a need for increased security in the domain. And I think as the world moves away, it moves outwards and explores further, there will probably be a role for a Space Force to do so as well. So you think precision navigation and timing as an example around the Moon, communications around the Moon. There's areas that I think will naturally progress to. Having said that, that was not the near-term priority. The near-term priority was the challenges and opportunities that we had closer to Earth.
Well, we're just about out of time here, so I want to thank everyone for coming today. I want to thank everyone who is online listening, and I hope that you enjoyed the conversation. Thank you to the Atlantic Council for allowing this event to happen, and I hope you have many more. Thanks a lot to everyone.
Teresa, let me say thank you to you as well. I really enjoyed it.